What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker, here with another edition of Unleashed, the weekly panel discussion show, coming at you a little bit early due to the holidays, and we didn't want to take a holiday off from this content, so here we are, a little bit early, making sure you guys got something to listen to. Now, of course, it's time to introduce the special guest that we have on the panel. You know him as the senior editor of WrestleZone. He's also a contributing editor at Sherdog.com. He is Tyler Treese. Tyler, how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk some mixed martial arts. Man, all on a holiday weekend. This is exciting.
It's a beautiful day. We should all have beers for this occasion, but I got to make a store run when this is all over with. So, Tyler, definitely great having you on. I know we've been trying to lock this down for a while, and now, thanks to the holiday, we got a little break in your schedule. So, appreciate you being here. Now, of course, we have to introduce another senior editor. He is the senior editor of Sherdog.com. He is also known as the jack of all trades who has mastered them all. His name is Ben Duffy. Ben, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing really well. I woke up a couple hours early just to be with you guys today because I love you that much. And now it is coming down like crazy, like the rains on Fight Island. So I'm just hoping that my internet connection holds up.
All right. Hoping and praying. And, of course, we have another editor. He's also an editor of Sherdog.com. He is the man with all the numbers, all the stats, all the statistics. He is Jay Petrie. Jay, good day, my brother. How you doing?
I'm glad to see you guys a little early. I know this is a very interesting weekend and a lot of stuff going on, memorializing, thinking about, I won't get dramatic, but like the New York Times newspaper and all those things. There's a lot of feelings going on this weekend. So let's push those feelings aside. Let's stuff them down, bottle them up, and let's talk about the stat of the week. The stat of the week is 0. 0 is the number of title defenses in the career of Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor famously spoke recently about he's the number 1 or number 2 greatest of all time. Now, in comparison, there's a couple pound-for-pound greats out there. George St. Pierre, Jose Aldo defended their title 9 times. Anderson Silva defended his UFC belt 10 times. Mighty Mouse Demetrius Johnson and John Jones defended their titles 11 times. Conor McGregor, 0.
Well, add a little seasoning salt to those gold conversations there. All right, fellas. So let's go ahead and jump into some major news that is going to affect the future of fights as we know them right now. Nevada Athletic Commission is meeting on May 27th to decide the fate of a May 30th event that's scheduled for the UFC. Also going to cast the fate on a June 6th date as well. Now, the fact that this meeting is taking place 3 days before a proposed event, are we just going to say that this is a foregone conclusion that Nevada is going to approve the UFC running at the Apex Center?
These meetings usually are formalities. They're okay. You've given us the paperwork. You've given us the licensing, the fees. You've not greased the palms per se, but greased the right palms, et cetera, et cetera. Conspiracy theories aside. But now, I'm not 100% sure. The commission, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, is meeting via teleconference for the first time since March to discuss, among other things, including a laundry list of fighters that want to be allowed licensed to fight in Nevada, to discuss whether the UFC's plan, which that 25 to 30 page plan, is good enough to go on in the state. And why I'm curious if it's going to be rubber stamped like usual is because if the commission, which can sometimes take a real critical eye to some of the things the UFC does sometimes, will look at the plan the UFC has versus the way it was just recently implemented. Because the UFC held 3 cards in Jacksonville, and the UFC held a plan, had protocols and procedures, and clearly and visibly didn't stick to them. The head of the company didn't adhere to the protocols that he shouted from the rooftops that they were going to hold and maintain. So if Nevada looks at those and says, hey, all right, so you had this plan, but you didn't follow it. So what are you going to make sure that you're going to suddenly do what you didn't do that you said you were going to do here in our state? UFC isn't leaving themselves much room. But I will note one thing. On the little UFC lineup announcement that Dana White did with John Anik, it said UFC Fight Night, blah, 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 Woodley Burns, and the lineup. in small disclaimer letters, it said pending final approval from Nevada Athletic Commission next week. So the UFC wasn't even comfortable enough to say, hey, this might not happen. But man, what would happen if Nevada said no?
Arizona. I mean, that was the
in
target.
2 days.
Well, I mean, we've seen crazier things happen. We have seen it happen before. I mean, we're just weeks removed from the whole fiasco involving Tachi Palace. They were skipping around different locales trying to figure out who was going to allow them to put a fight on. We're not that far removed from UFC 232 being moved from Vegas to Los Angeles on I believe it was 6 days notice. So this isn't that unprecedented. Tyler, now I'm going to ask you something pretty straightforward here. Now, are you having flashbacks to Dana White announcing on SportsCenter the UFC Apex Center was going to host all these cards at the beginning of this pandemic?
I think unlike that, I think this is going to happen this time. I really hope Nevada throws a wrench into the plans of the UFC, and just so we get some chaos. I want to see if they can get into Arizona. I want to see if they emergency fly everybody back out to Jacksonville. I want to see how ridiculous it can get. But sadly, I do think Nevada is just going to get their economy kickstarted, have some UFC cards, start things up again. But man, just for 1 second, it's fun to think about some type of disaster happening.
Ben, are you as much of an anarchist as our guest?
I am not. I think it is a delightful and charming trait in Mr. Treese that he just wants to see how big a shit show the most routine things can become. But I mean, you already brought up the short notice moving of UFC 232. I was shocked when that happened, just because the NSAC generally doesn't stand up to the UFC and tell them no. Having said that, I do think these are going to happen. Vegas is dying to reopen. It and Hawaii are the state economies that have been hit hardest by the death of tourism. I mean, our own contributor, Mike Sloan, a veteran MMA guy, lives in Vegas, and his other lines of work, have ramped up recently because Vegas is trying to reopen. So I think this is going to happen, and it will be a canary in a plague-infested coal mine for the opening of other entertainment industries.
I think it's also notable to mention that Top Rank has decided to throw their hat in there as well. They're trying to plan an event around the same time. The actual date escapes me at the moment, but I believe they're trying to get a card set up with Shakur Stevenson in a headlining role. Now, Top Rank, like most of the other boxing promoters, seem to have been, granted, maybe that's because of legislation like the Alley Act, and they are under a lot more regulation and certain rules that they have to follow and whatnot. But they have been trying to cooperate with the government through this pandemic, and they have not been trying to force an agenda. The UFC, on the other hand, tends to be more the rogue outliner. Now, if Top Rank is deciding that they want to try to push forward with an event right now, I think it's much more likely that Nevada is already decided that this is going to happen, and this meeting is a formality. So.
And if they can't get in, it's interesting because Tachi Palace is not available to the UFC or anywhere in California until June 1st or 2nd, I believe, is when California, maybe it's June 4th, but California is opening up crowdless sporting events starting the beginning of June. So there's that little window of May, May 30th, which is right before that date, where the UFC couldn't scurry over there and say, hey, California, we're here.
Well, I mean, theoretically, they probably could. I mean, it's the same sort of issue that they faced before with Tachi being tribal land, and whether or not the California Commission is simply invited to regulate shows on Tachi, or if they're mandated to. Mm-hmm. And it took a literal call from the governor and action with ESPN to stop that. So if Dana White or Endeavor Brass just decided to ignore them, they could have pushed forward. So I don't see why Tachi wouldn't be an option now, although the logistics, I'm sure, will be a nightmare on 2 or 3 days' notice. All right, fellas, so let's move on here. We're going to jump into our swing or miss. Now, swing or miss, fellas. Is the UFC making a mistake by not offering more money to make the John Jones versus Francis Ngannou heavyweight fight?
Swing. Any sentence that starts with the UFC is making a mistake by not offering to pay more money, I'm probably going to be on board with. You know, obviously, I would advocate for the UFC raising purses across the board from the most entry-level fighters at the bottom of the undercard to their biggest stars. I mean, even their biggest stars are not that well paid by the standards of stick and ball sports or even the top boxing stars. So, yeah, absolutely. And this is a fight that both guys kind of cautiously seem to want. Each guy thinks he can legit beat the other. They're getting a little salty with each other on social media. Fans apparently want to see it, either because they want to see Jones achieve another level of greatness, or they just want to see somebody finally beat him in the cage and shut him up and, stomp on everything he stands for, because he's become that kind of divisive fighter. But God, why wouldn't you? But it's the most UFC thing ever that rather than pay one of their biggest stars more money, they just kind of undercut his stardom. They're kind of like, oh, well, he doesn't sell that big. Like, what entertainment industry does that to their own stars other than the UFC?
I mean, yeah, John Jones is clearly not a needle mover. Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, the fight would not be unprofitable if they gave both of those fighters raises. They already pay out such a low amount of each event to the fighters to where they could get substantial raises and they would still not impact their bottom line that much. So, like, to act like this one-off fight wouldn't be worth it, and to get Jones to move to heavyweight, because here's the thing: if that fight with Ngannou is successful, you have even bigger fights for Jones at heavyweight that would make even more money, that are way more interesting than Jan at 205, or other rematches at light heavyweight that we've already seen. And there's some interest in there just because Jones hasn't been super impressive as of late, but it pales in comparison to the heavyweight fights.
That's what really surprises me too, is that the UFC, this is according to John Jones, who had he kind of basically live tweeted parts of his negotiations the other day to kind of hold the UFC to the fire a little bit, or whatever he was saying. Some of the things were inconsistent with one another, but the general story was the UFC wasn't willing to pony up. And that struck me because, I think of a couple fighters recently who have all been allowed to move up to another division and probably may very well have been paid more. Like, I don't know, like a Conor McGregor guy. I feel like he was probably paid more money to fight Nate Diaz at welterweight because, I don't know, the disclosed purses said he was. So there are lots of fighters that the UFC will allow to move up and will offer to compensate them accordingly. And yet, why is John Jones not the guy? Of all the fighters that would be qualifying for practically cleaned out the division in this era, outside of Amanda Nunes, I have to think John Jones is that guy who is close to cleaning out the division. Now, granted, there were close fights, but does anybody in the universe, in one championship's 13 trillion viewers, actually think that John Jones versus Ngannou would not sell compared to, I don't know, a mega fight like John Jones versus Glover Teixeira 2? Like, how can the UFC be this short-sighted? What is the downside? If Jones loses, he goes back to light heavyweight, and oh, that's right, he moved up in weight to fight the big Goliath guys. Sure, he lost, but he lost heavyweight so he can keep his light heavyweight thing intact, like Max Holloway did against Dustin Poirier. Holloway seemed fine. He lost the next fight, but legacy-wise, it was no big deal. And if Ngannou loses, Jones is a legitimate heavyweight contender to be the guy who did it right to move up in a weight class, fight another guy before getting an immediate title shot and doing the double champ thing. It doesn't make sense from an outside perspective unless Jones wanted some raise that was unreasonable. But since fighters are paid so poorly compared to other athletes of other major sports, how likely is it his request was objectively unreasonable? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I'm swinging.
I do find it interesting too that where this was maybe a couple months back, I remember a particular heated Twitter exchange from our good friend of the show, Matt Hunter of Mixed Combat Radio, that he had with John Jones's manager, Malky Kawa, where there was some serious friction as a result of the $500,000 guaranteed pay that Jones made, I think for UFC 232 and I believe 235 as well. So this pushback from Cowell was about, well, if you think this is all the money that Jones makes, you're crazy, but guaranteed purse.
Right.
Um, I don't find it that. I mean, I just find it very ironic now that Jones is complaining about the amount of money that he is being offered guaranteed to increase the level of difficulty in the opponents in front of him. Kind of strange. I mean, but hey, let's play devil's advocate here. The UFC doesn't have the live gate money anymore, so they're losing out, right?
I had to say drop in the bucket compared to pay-per-view and broadcasting fees. But really, I want to ask you guys a question, and it could be rhetorical. Is John Jones versus Francis Ngannou at heavyweight arguably one of the biggest non-title fights the UFC can make right now? Alongside of, like, I don't know, Conor and Masvidal. That's got to be, like, just... That's
that
the
would
kind
be
of
a
fight
title
that could sell.
fight, Jay. That'd be for the BMF. Come on.
Oh, stick a fork in me. I'm done.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jay. I mean, Jones and Ngannou, not only does it, from a competitive standpoint, it sounds very intriguing. It sets up future big fights, no matter who wins. Can you think of any more renewed interest in a like if you put on Stipe versus Ngannou too? Sure, it might get some eyeballs looking at it, but imagine if Ngannou knocked out John Jones. And then and then you put him up against Stipe again. There's just so many different angles to this that the UFC is not looking at, and in my opinion, it's simply to maintain their power, their lockdown over the entire roster. Which, I mean, as we saw this before, Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier campaigning for that 165-pound title shot at UFC 230 to main event. Instead, they were ready to go with Valentina Shevchenko versus was it Sajar Eubanks?
Yeah.
They were willing to literally shoot themselves in the foot from a promotional standpoint, as opposed to just putting on a fight the way everyone wanted to see it. So nothing would surprise me at this point. All right, fellas. So let's go ahead and move along here. I don't know about you guys, but June 13th, mark it on your calendars. Jessica Eye versus Cynthia Calvillo. Fight of the century material here. How do we feel about this stellar main event, gentlemen?
I'm gonna start out, I guess, and be an unusual voice of reason and or insanity. Gut reaction. Saw the announcement in the Sherdog Slack channel. I didn't quite rip on it, but I was like, seriously, is this what's happening? Compare Jessica Eye and Cynthia Calvillo to, I don't know, Aljo Sterling, Corey Sandhagen for 5 rounds. There's several undercard or non-main event fights upcoming that could be better. But then I got to thinking and want to remain consistent and in my message, because on this show, many times I've squawked about how the UFC has just floundered the flyweight division, the men's flyweight division. Very few of the fights are headliners, let alone fighters like Wilson Hayes, who fight for the title, had never seen a main card until he fought Demetrius Johnson for the title. So we have Jessica Eye, who is the UFC number one ranked flyweight in the division, taking on the number 10 ranked strawweight, who has a history of missing weight, moving up for the first time. So on paper, number 1 versus number 10 in another division coming up to meet them is the kind of fight that should deserve recognition. And when you compare it to other fights on the card, do we really want to see Marvin Vettori, Carl Roberson go at it for 5 rounds because we know it's going to be a first-round knockout because they hate each other? Or Jordan Espinosa, Mark Della Bumblebee. There's not a lot of options on the card as it stands to headline it. But, and maybe this is something we'll touch on later, the UFC really isn't building its fight nights well. This currently feels like the content phase of the trying to bang out 34 events for the ESPN broadcasting deal.
So here's my counterpoint, Jay. Do you really want to watch Jessica Eye for 5 rounds?
We didn't have to when she was scheduled for 5 rounds last time.
I don't think we're going to get that much delightful violence out of this fight, sadly.
Well, it's just to break the fight down. I mean, you can see how Calvillo tries to get a fight down for a round, doesn't, and then we turn into a kickboxing match. So I can see that going for 5 glorious, exciting rounds. But, we won't see them if they're not on the main stage. We won't pay attention to them. But yeah, I'm not denying there are about 1,000 better fights. Duffy, am I wrong? Am I crazy?
No, I mean, this doesn't even feel like a co-main event. I is one of those fighters. I mean, this is about as high level flyweight matchup as you can make outside of the immediate title picture right now. But it's gonna be a dreadful fight. I is only exciting to watch when she loses, sadly. But when she wins, we get a terrible fight, and then we get the kind of post-fight interview that I assume Tyler loves because they just make me cringe. I have to turn the TV off.
I mean, I hope she makes it to the JRE this time, but continue.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That is a great point, Ben, because she's in the main event, we get a Jessica Eye interview, win or lose now.
That's true.
Hear that awkward swearing clattering off the walls of an empty Apex. It's going to be amazing. Yeah, I mean, there's not really much more to say about that. This card currently has about 8 fights on it, and it feels like it needs 3 more at the top.
I think this is a reflection of rushing through, trying to get events done. I mean, we are just a week or so removed, or 2 weeks removed from 3 events within 8 days that had a great amount of star power on them, and now our main events have shifted to a fight that otherwise probably wouldn't have made it out of the prelims. Not to say that this fight deserves to be on the prelims. I think it's a high enough level fight, and it's important enough to the future of the women's flyweight division that it needs to be placed on a main card. But a main event, sorry, it really lacks a lot there. So you rush through these 3 events, and now it's kind of like, all right, now what pieces do we have left? Let's cobble something together and throw it out there so we fulfill our contractual obligations to ESPN.
I mean, UFC 249 happened 2 weeks ago, and it was the pay-per-view event, the first card back after a long absence. I can look at this lineup at UFC 249, and almost every one of the top 8 fights could be a headliner that might strike your interest to be more exciting as a 5-rounder. Calvin Kattar, Jeremy Stevens, Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone, even Alexei Oleinik, Fabricio Verdum, or Carlos Esparza, Michelle Watterson are the types of potential main event material not to ignore, Ngannou, Rozenstruik, and Cejudo Cruz. So the UFC had a plethora of main event fights that they put onto one card, and now we're seeing the result of that.
Yeah, and that type of stacking doesn't even really make that much sense right now, because how many fights are pay-per-view? 5. So why are you putting 10 pay-per-view worthy fights on one card?
Yeah, I'm looking at these cards and the lineups and just struggling with how the UFC is putting together these cards, pulling major fights and stacking them onto one card together versus having a fight night card that's kind of a nondescript throwaway card. But I've said my piece. And what do you think about number 1 Jessica Eye versus number 10 strawweight Cynthia Calvillo as a main event?
I mean, as a main event, I'm not very pleased with it. I don't think from a style standpoint, this stands to be an entertaining enough fight for us to want to see 5 rounds of. I will say it is important for the division, so it deserves some level of higher placement on the card. But this is not a main event. The problem is, though, as you or Ben, forgive me for forgetting which one of you said this, alluded to earlier, there is nothing main event worthy on this card that could go in its place. A lot of the names that would have been good for main events have been used already in that 8-day bonanza. So I think at this point, this is clearly just filling up content. That's the only purpose of this, and perhaps we can say that the UFC's intention for those 3 events in 8 days in Jacksonville was more so a statement than anything else, to go ahead and capture the attention of the general sports world if you can, with all these big names. And now, okay, back to the status quo because we've got your attention now. That seems to be the plan here, if there is any plan at all.
I'm wondering when you guys think about this. Like, I think it was Duffy said there are about 8 fights worth of looking at in the card, give or take. These next upcoming fight nights have 5 to 8 fights scheduled so far. These as we're calling them, the content type cards. Would it behoove the UFC to keep them like that? Have an 8 card quick fight night, a 4-hour in and out, get out of here, UFC Apex show, like extended contender series type of thing?
Oh, you mean like cards were when I started watching the sport?
I mean, like the way cards were when we started watching the sport, and not 14 fight endeavors.
I like it. The issue is, do the contractual obligations allow it? That's really the only question to answer here, because it would be sweet if they were housed in the Apex Center and you had a 6-fight card and you're in and out in an hour and a half or 2 hours like we do on the Contender Series, and you just get an event knocked out the way, and it doesn't ruin the rest of your day and doesn't require literally everything you have in you for the next 24 hours to power through a card. That would be nice, but their contracts may not allow that. Their contracts may say you have to have a certain number of fights, or the program has to run a certain length of time. So they just may not have that option, period.
I think one other thing to consider about this card, and especially this as a main event, is that with so few sports going on right now, and fight fans, we're all degenerates. Does it matter what fights they put on? Aren't we all going to tune in anyways? Jay, what were you watching yesterday?
I'll talk about that. Don't worry about
it.
Yeah,
so if you're going to watch that, you're going to tune into whatever crap the UFC puts on.
Oh, yeah, I'm a unicorn.
I'm
my coverage. I'm insane.
I'm completely on board with Tyler here, and I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to circle back around to this. For as much as it sounds like all 4 of us are kind of dumping on this card, and on paper, as currently constituted, it's one of the weakest UFC cards I've ever seen. Of course, I'm still going to watch it. It's on free TV or TV that I'm already paying for, and it's fights. Like, I will go to a local show where there's 24 fighters in the card, and maybe 3 of them are UFC material one day, years from now, and I'll love it. So if I'm going to watch a card where, by definition, everybody on the card is UFC material and it's free on my TV, what the hell else am I going to be doing? So yeah, I am grateful that fights are back. I don't want to look, the gift horse in the mouth too hard, because a month ago, oh my God, too many fight cards would have been a wonderful problem to have. So, I'm loath to complain about there being fights back in our lives, even if I am going to take, issue with like some of the specific quality from event to event.
I mean, how quick was it to see the MMA fan base? Like, for instance, the lovely Sherdog forums, for example, which were, yes, fights are back. Oh my God, UFC 249 is the best thing ever. The Wednesday card, moldy garbage. So it's interesting how quickly that changes.
Yeah, the thing is with this though, I definitely get that, and we are starved for content. We are aching to watch some level of live sporting entertainment. I mean, I think it was yesterday, Dave Doyle, our friend at MMA Junkie, tweeted something about watching some sort of obscure foreign baseball league, and he said it felt like the World Series to him. So that's that's kind of the levels that we've had to stoop to. I mean, we can't play Call of Duty Warzone all day long, or can we? I do appreciate a fight being on, but it's just this, to have this as a main event when you've let off so much hollow point ammunition in the last couple of weeks with all these high level names and exciting matchups and whatnot. It's like, just save a little bit to main event a card, and I think that's all we're asking. If you put the Ngannou Rosenstruck fight as the main event to this, Would that have hurt the card that was on too much? No, on 249? Not
Nope.
really.
Nope.
But would it have severely helped the card that we are about to watch in a week's time here? I believe so.
And
So
I think it wouldn't have taken away, just to very quickly touch on that, it wouldn't have taken away from, like, say, the pay-per-view buy rates of that card versus, just objectively speaking, you have to imagine the total viewing audience watching an Ngannou card versus this card may be substantially different. Hundreds of thousands more people will be paying attention, potentially. Because it's, oh yeah, I know that Ngannou guy. He uppercutted that other guy with the mohawk up to the stratosphere.
exactly, yeah. So there definitely is some benefits to kind of spreading some of the love around on these cards. But gentlemen, let's move on a little bit from there because we've got some Fight Island talk.
Woo!
Don't we love that? So Jay, I don't think your Hawaiian shirt is Hawaiian enough today.
I'm ready to rock.
But it's all right because here we go. Dana White has mentioned that the Fight Island shows are supposed to begin in June. And he even said that he plans on living on Fight Island for the month of June while the 3 or 4 proposed events are running through here. So if Fight Island really is taking place here, what big fights do we think are going to be headlining these shows?
Does anyone feel like this might just be like a way for him to get himself an island and write it off? Like, do you think it's going to be there for all of July, regardless of whether there's actually fights taking place or not?
I love how, like, Eddie Hearn is just like, let's just put boxing matches in my backyard, and Dana White's like, we need an island, folks.
We need an island. I mean,
This
we
rules.
can't.
I'm so excited for this.
We can't possibly pay Jones and Ngannou anymore, but hey, I just bought a fucking island.
And I built an entire cage and facilities and lodging and hospitality
And fake snow. And well, no,
all the
that's
fake snow. I got everybody on the staff a Hawaiian shirt, so they're going to have like a long sleeve Mike Goldberg Hawaiian shirt. It's going to be amazing.
on principle.
Yeah.
On principle, I'm fine with Fight Island. I'll say the same thing I said a month ago when this started to become a thing. The UFC already runs kind of a 2-track promotional model where they have actual ladders of contention with the best fighters fighting each other to move towards a title shot. And then they have the kind of weird sensationalist sideshow stuff that happens off to the side. I love that stuff as long as it doesn't interfere with actual title pictures. So anytime the BMF title is contested, it should be on the fucking island. If you want CM Punk to fight somebody, it should be on the island. Like, just make that your thing for like weird sensational matchups that aren't really relevant in their divisions.
I
There
love
you go.
your thinking, Ben. I love your thinking. So what I think should headline International Waters Fight Week is about between Conor McGregor and Jorge Masvidal, because think about Masvidal. If anybody is born to fight on Fight Island, it's that man. He was fighting in backyards. He deserves to be the kingpin of Fight Island.
There you go.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, he fought multiple times on Bodog Fight. So he's done the Costa Rica beach fight thing before. This wouldn't be out of place for him. I'm with Tyler on this one. I think that Masvidal Conor is the type of fight because, yeah, there aren't immediate title implications, but there are. But it also keeps Conor McGregor away from the
BMF title
fight.
implications. Jay, come on here. Quit
I'm not gonna
disrespecting the
do
belt
it.
of the beat.
I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna buy $1,000 silver piece of thing and hang it on my back for one week. But it is important to note that there was some news that may impact Fight Island and how it goes forward. Because one of the reasons Fight Island was implemented was for international fighters that may not be able to get into the United States to compete for whatever reason. Now, there's been news recently that the U.S. government is planning on implementing a travel ban to Brazil because of the coronavirus, which would impact, what I would say probably the second biggest cluster of fighters next to the U.S. on the UFC roster. But there will be a loophole implemented that sports athletes will be exempt and that should presumably bring in all athletes from the banned countries as well. Now, of course, this doesn't impact visas. Like, for instance, Jose Aldo had to pull out of his fight because he couldn't get a visa to come to the U.S., so that's where Jose Aldo should fight. But here's a problem that we're running into. It's today on Sunday, it's May 24th. You know, the first event, Dana said Fight Island events will begin in June. Now, if we take him at his word, and say June 27th is the first show on this fabled fantasy Fight Island, that's a month away, and we have nothing really to show for it so far. Will the UFC be able to shoehorn a bunch of major fights on this to make it a blowout card in a month? Color me skeptical.
Depending on who you have headlining, though, I don't think they'd have to shoehorn in too many big fights. I mean, if you were to have Conor McGregor versus Jorge Masvidal, not saying that fight is going to be easy to make, and not saying that that's a fight that should necessarily headline a Fight Island card, but you put a fight of that caliber on there, does it really matter what's on the rest of the event? Like it really doesn't. I mean, you can full on go with the boxing model of a marquee name main event and cannon fodder to follow. So you can dig really deep in the 600 plus athlete roster for the UFC and just put something together, or they could even do like they did in the midst of the cancellation of the London card and literally put out an open call to athletes that were willing to compete in the UFC. So you easily can do that with Fight Island with a name that big on the top of the headline there. But I mean, I'm just kind of questioning, does it make any sense anymore if you can get these athletes from other countries into the U.S.?
It doesn't make sense, but it's really cool, and that's all that matters. Fight Island. Well, I got to go back to something Jay said, because he said Fantasy Fight Island. Like, can we imagine, like, Fantasy Island? They have, like, a little short assistant, like Mark Ramondi, right there to help everybody fulfill their fighting dreams. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Don't we all want to go to Fight Fantasy Island?
Well, you know what? I like the idea of a Fight Island, that style, what you're saying, but why don't they do it right? Why don't they, this infrastructure that they talk about as being built and be ready by June, whatever, delay it. Like keep building and build it right. Next summer, open up Fight Island for a month and have a VIP resort to have a plethora of events and a full-on fan experience for a high roller. That would then be broadcasted for the rest of the world. That idea sounds a lot more fully fleshed out and a lot more sensible. You can plan to have big names. You can generate a ton of income by the high rollers that will be coming in just wanting to be part of this experience that will be like a real life version of Lionheart, and just do it that way, as opposed to forcing this to happen now, doing it haphazardly when you don't even have to. And I think that's more the issue now. You don't have to, especially if Nevada approves the Apex Center being the home of the UFC going forward. It will be such of a waste of resources and time and effort from the UFC staff to worry about getting this obscure island, wherever it may be, up and running, instead of just driving 4 blocks down the street from your house and going into your office and doing work as you normally do.
I love that idea.
Without the international restrictions.
Could we get Ja Rule involved?
I think this is Ja Rule is definitely, especially since 50 Cent is an ambassador for Bellator. You need Ja Rule to be an ambassador for the UFC now. So I like it.
He'll be writing like a $900 check for like the.
All right. So before we get too ridiculous, let's go into something that we've talked about this to an extent before, but it's a little more serious take on the Fight Island thing. If given the chance, would you guys cover Fight Island live?
Absolutely. It's probably the easiest way I could get a COVID-19 test, for starters. And
I thought you were going to say it's the easiest way you could catch COVID-19.
That too, knock them out both. We got a I've got a dream list to get off, but like I want to live there like Dana for the month. I want the full experience. I want to enjoy the beach. I go there in an instant.
You guys, are you with Tyler? You packing your bags?
If I worked for an outlet that paid for travel and lodging to do work for them live at an event, I'd be there in a heartbeat. I mean, I'm the perfect guy for it. I have a wardrobe of luxurious Hawaiian shirts already. I don't even have to shop to be ready to be dressed for the occasion. I'll even wear a tropical themed mask. I mean, if we're going all out,
Is that a tropical theme mask hanging on your wall behind you, by the way?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
You might need to get ONE FC to put on their own fight island so they can fly us all out.
I'm actually surprised ONE FC hasn't done this already.
Well, they're in trouble because Singapore shut it down until like July, so they might have to.
Wow. All right. I mean, they're worth like $1 trillion, so they could easily afford it. So now I do have to say I would cover Fight Island just because it's so ridiculous. Like, why wouldn't you want to do it? The only thing is, I'm so used to not wearing real pants anymore. I will not be dressed up on press row. That's for sure. Like every time I've been on press row, I've got a full on suit or I've at least got the vest and the tie and all that. No, I'm talking about joggers and no drawers. All right.
I think you can go shirtless on Fight Island.
Yeah, are you kidding me? You think oh, I don't know why I wore a Hawaiian shirt to cover 247 on press row. So
I mean, you talking about going shirtless on Fight Island when I got this quarantine body and just been in here eating junk food and playing video games.
Get a month, buddy.
Yeah, time to start working out. All right, fellas. So, Lel, let's move on to the greatest title for any segment in media history. That is called "I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons," and that is where we share something in the combat sports world that surprised us over the past week, whether it be pre-fight coverage, the fights themselves, afterward, wasn't a whole lot of fights to talk about, but plenty of news made. So let's go ahead and share those moments. Ben, I'll start with you. What is your I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons moment this week?
Well, speaking of one championship, I spent a while talking on the phone this past week with Mr. Sage Northcutt. One championship, upcoming featherweight. That would be 155-pound featherweight. Just like me to, look at a list of some of the top fighting talents in Asia and choose to talk to the guy that lives in Texas with me. But hey, that's just how I do it. He is a charmingly upbeat and energetic individual, as anyone who has, encountered any of his interviews or his Instagram or anything knows. I mean, my thought after I got off the phone with him was, if I could talk to Sage Northcutt for just 15 minutes each morning, I could probably swear off coffee. But if it got to 30 minutes, I'd probably swear off alcohol and swearing. So like the therapeutic range of Sage Northcutt exposure is pretty narrow. But an interesting thing, because he is, I mean, for the last couple of years, he's lived out in California while he's trained at Team Alpha Male. But during the pandemic, he's been bunkered down here in Texas with his folks. And I asked him, considering that one championship was probably the first major promotion to just shut everything down. They were in Asia. They were catching the first wave of all this. And meanwhile, UFC cards had just been happening. I said, if one was running cards right now, would you want to fight on one? Or if you were still in the UFC, would you be wanting to fight on one? And he just said, no, absolutely not. And that kind of took me back. And he was like, even if I could fight, like fly out somewhere and fight, I couldn't have anything resembling a full camp. I mean, he's like, I owe myself, I owe the fans, I owe my opponent more than that. And we're talking about a guy, if you know Sage Northcutt, I'm going to assume that aside from maybe a half dozen like longtime champions, he is probably the best equipped person to have a fight camp at home. I mean, we're talking about someone who was the youngest athlete ever on the cover of Black Belt magazine, the youngest person ever to be in the Black Belt magazine Hall of Fame. His folks are well off. I mean, the dude has gym equipment in his home. And even he is like, no, I couldn't do anything approaching actual fight camp preparation. So no, I wouldn't take a fight right now, even if I were in an org that would, that would put them on. And I thought that was, kind of an interestingly measured and mature response from a guy whose normal trademark up to now has just been, being like a muscular puppy and just super enthusiastic about everything. So that's my moment for the week.
All right, Tyler, what's your I'm not surprised Mr. Falcons moment this week?
So I think what surprised me the most was that MMA junkie furloughed John Morgan, man. Like, you think of anybody that has like the clout and like is the face of an outlet like that, you think like if anybody would not be impacted by the current awful media landscape, it'd be Mr. Morgan, and especially just 1 week after, putting himself in danger covering the UFC cards, like, man, rough. Like, it just underlines how kind of screwed this whole line of work is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
And I got a little bit of clarity from him. They are doing like rolling week-long furloughs of a bunch of their senior staff, so it's not like he's just been booted to the curb for the next 3 months. But nonetheless, I was stunned as well.
Yeah, definitely. Also notable too. P.D. Carroll was let go of from MMA fighting as well, and he's definitely one of the better names out there doing this line of work. Actually, stay tuned to Walkout Network. I'm trying to get him on, so we're going to work the scheduling out, but he might be filling a role on this panel before long. Jay, what's your I'm not surprised Mr. Falcons moment this week?
All right, boys, let's go on a journey. So Mr. Treese kind of touched on it briefly earlier, and it's time to get surprised and or not surprised. I'll let you be the judge. So over this weekend, we didn't have any legit MMA of any major degree going on. However, in Poland, we had the second event from a promotion I talked about in January. Votor, I believe is how it's officially pronounced. It's a bare-knuckle MMA promotion, allows knees, elbows, takedowns, throws, ground and pound. So it's basically MMA with limited headbutts, because awesome, right? So it takes place on this 30 by 30 foot circular platform, and it's about 18 inches off the ground, and surrounding it is a smoke-filled moat with sandbags surrounding the moat itself to keep it like a mist. So that happened, and it was delightful. They made a big change this time. The first event, you could sumo your opponent out of the ring and throw them down into the sandbags or into the moat. If you did so multiple times, you won by TKO. So they did away with that rule. And you're killing me here. They did away with that rule to make it so it was just a bloody, messy brawl. Spoiler alert, it was. In case I haven't given enough rules or lack thereof, 1 round, no time limits, no weight classes, no mercy, just bleed. It was a $5 pay-per-view, and I covered it live on the Sherdog Twitter account. I did a running play-by-play and images and screenshots and whatnot. It delivered all the ludicrous excitement and entertainment you could expect it could deliver, like all the craziness and the ring girls that were wearing tribal outfits, literally painting names in red paint onto the wall to make a tournament bracket. You can't make this kind of stuff up. Now, why is this an I'm not surprised segment, you ask? Well, I'm surprised there was a second event, period. I did not think Votor would have a successor. I expected it to be a one-off thing and done. And I'm even more surprised it happened now. There were no fans in attendance, just a bunch of fighters and their corners or whatever. But of note, Omi Lanchik in the UFC has a little brother named Cesare, and he's smashed some guy's face off and heel hooked him. So that's interesting. But yeah, Votor 2. That's a hell of a drug.
I just inject that right into my veins. All right. My I'm not surprised Mr. Falcons moment comes courtesy of Floyd Mayweather Jr., a consistent beacon of intelligence and forethought, who was spotted partying in Arizona in a packed nightclub, no mask, no PPE in sight, and can't say I'm too shocked. Mayweather, yeah, this sounds like him. This is Floyd.
Well, if you inject cash into your bloodstream, it's actually the cure for COVID-19.
It's
Oh,
the
yeah.
cure for that too. It's not just HIV cure. Dang.
Yeah.
Why didn't you just have like $100 bills, staple them together, and just hold them like this?
That'd be like a baller mask. I like
That
that.
would
Yeah.
be.
And with that, I'll announce that Alex Jones will be taking the fourth seat in the panel next week. All right, so let's move on to the
Rocks.
speed bag, and this is where I get to flex my authority on you, mofo. So let me go ahead and get this clock. You gentlemen will have 10 seconds to answer each question that I'm going to put in front of you. Let's see. There we go. There's your guys' setting. We're going to turn the volume up on this clock and keep that screen on. So I'm going to start with you, Ben, this week. Mike Perry claimed that he will only have his girlfriend in his corner. How is that going to work out for him? You have 10 seconds.
I don't see how he could do any worse than he's been doing, so bring it on, I guess.
All right. Tyler.
Absolutely, it's going to work out great. When I think of somebody that is, makes solid decision making, it's Mike Perry. I trust him.
All right, and Jay.
How could a guy with a face tattoo make a bad decision? I just don't believe it. I'll respect his girlfriend, but good luck with that, buddy.
All right. And just this isn't the Platinum Princess, right? This is a different girl now.
Maybe.
This isn't the one that like Colby was taking shots at a year or two ago.
I actually do think I remember that Mike Perry's girlfriend competed at his SUG event against somebody. I don't know if I think that's the same girl. So I don't know. Maybe. Who's going to look? I'm not it. Not it.
All right. So Tyler, I'll begin with you on this one. You have 10 seconds. Jorge Masvidal wants to run it back with Nate Diaz. Are you into that rematch?
I mean, I'd watch the fight, obviously, but that's not what I want to see. I want to see him go against Conor. He beat Nate too decisively the first time.
All right. Jay.
Yeah, but why? I mean, Jorge wants it. It's a money fight. But this guy's been on the shelf for 7 months. Give this man a real fight.
All right. And Ben.
Yeah, agreed. Like, I don't know why Jorge wants this. Is it even that big of a money fight at this point?
All right. Good points there. All right, fellas. So last question, and I will begin with you, Jay, on this one. Is Conor McGregor the number 2 or possibly tied for number 1 GOAT status with Anderson Silva? You have 10 seconds.
Okay, do me a favor, audience. Rewind this video back to the introduction and listen to the stat of the week. There's your answer.
Ben.
Not even close. And the sad thing is, he could be by now if he'd made different choices in the last 4 or 5 years. And I hope that fucking burns.
Tyler.
I mean, it depends on what greatest of all time we're talking about. If it's trash talking, I could see him tied for number 1 with Silva.
He's normal.
Oh. All right, fellas. So now, good job on that all around. Now it's my turn to jump in the fire here. So I'm going to put 30 seconds on the clock. I will answer all 3 questions in succession. The clock will start after I read the first question. So Mike Perry claimed this week he will only have his girlfriend in his corner. How's that going to work out for him? From a fight IQ standpoint, it won't really make much of a difference. Yeah, I mean, Mike Perry has not exactly done anything intelligent in the cage or out of it. Okay, so Masvidal and Nate Diaz too. I am not interested. Diaz got absolutely smashed. Anybody who says otherwise is not very smart and doesn't know what they're looking at. Masvidal just wants a tune-up, I guess. And McGregor is definitely not the number 2 behind Anderson. That is ludicrous. Man, if I didn't stutter my words, I would have had a great joke to finish it off. But whatever, I had.
What's the joke? What's the joke? Come on.
I was going to make it up on the fly, but I could feel it. I could feel it. It was bubbling up there. All right. So fellas, we're going to conclude it with a little bit of talk about UFC on ESPN 9. It will be the first of 5 consecutive weeks of UFC coverage, if all goes according to plan. As of now, Tyron Woodley and Gilbert Burns will be the headliners. How do you see that main event playing out? I'll start with you, Tyler.
I think we're going to see Woodley get back to form, hopefully. His last fight, he looked like he wasn't really all there, but I feel like the time off's been good for him. I feel like we're going to see a remotivated Woodley, and I think he's going to look really good and dominate the fight.
All right. Any other takes on that main event that you guys want to share, Jay or Ben?
The only thing I'd throw in there is I agree with Tyler, with the one caveat that when you're talking about a 38-year-old man who's been inactive for a while and has been as injury prone as Woodley, and Woodley isn't one of those guys like Shogun where it's like, oh, it's his knee again. Like, he's had it all. He's had shoulder, knee, hand, just he needs like the 75,000-mile service where they replace a bunch of your parts. Only humans don't get that. If he looks anything like, the Tyron Woodley of 2 years ago, I don't think Burns has anything for him. But it's going to be a crapshoot. I'm interested to see how he looks physically, just even in a vacuum, regardless of what Burns has for him.
Yeah, I'm also not totally sold about what Woodley we're going to get. I mean, not only inactivity has really plagued him, but yeah, he's getting up there. And I'm curious what we're going to see. The last time Woodley won a fight was in September 2018. Since then, Gilbert Burns has won 5 fights in a row. Like, this is a guy who's been active, moved up to welterweight, and has looked great at it. I might favor Burns in this one if Woodley is not able to get the takedown quick like he wants to. Now, Burns has had sometimes struggled in the past with it, like Michel Tractor Prazeres grounded him multiple times and just kind of wore him out. I'm wondering if Woodley can get the fight down, because if he can he handle Burns? Over 5 rounds, I think I got to give it to Burns for some reason. Yeah, maybe it might. I mean, I'm not sure what he wants to do on his own time. But anyway, yeah, I'm really curious about this fight.
Yeah, I'm gonna favor Woodley in this one. Granted that if we're seeing a Woodley that doesn't look 38 years old, injury riddled, and we see him a little more focused than we did at UFC 235. I mean, Gilbert Burns, I mean, his main claim to fame has been his jiu-jitsu, of course. And we're talking about a Woodley who's never been submitted. A man who shut down Damian Maia. It may not have been the most crowd-pleasing fight, but he completely nullified perhaps the greatest jiu-jitsu practitioner in mixed martial arts history with relative ease. So I don't see Burns having much of a shot at a victory here unless something were wrong with Woodley. And granted, at his age, with the miles he has on him, that could be a thing. But I think another caveat that we got to mention here too, Woodley, has gone on record with saying how he has blown a lot of the money that he made as champion. I think his run as champion got sidetracked with his ventures into music and acting and his TMZ gig and whatnot, and kind of spreading himself too thin.
Yeah.
A Woodley that's broke, that's that's looking for a big fight payday, might be a little hungrier, might be a little more fired up, and we might see a return to that form that he had coming off the heels of a very successful Strikeforce run and smashing his way through contenders in the UFC. So I'm looking forward to this on that end. I just got to go with Woodley right now. He's got the track record that says he should be able to handle everything that Gilbert Burns is going to throw at him. So we'll conclude it like.
Did you check the track he dropped last week?
No, I did not. I actively avoid his music now.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, is he like the 2020 Broke John Fitch? Is that what his new version is going to be? No, nobody remembers that meme. Broke John
Bitcoin rap?
Fitch.
Oh, I was going to the Bitcoin rap. I don't know. Is that a thing? But yeah. So that's such a deep dive on inside jokes there. But anyway, just to wrap up our discussion on this UFC Fight Night card, I'll throw my hat in the ring first as far as sleeper fights. Roosevelt Roberts versus Brock Weaver. Yes, please sign me up 3 times over. What other fights on this card kind of spark your attention? Tyler, I'll start with you.
So, I'm looking for some chaos, and I think it's actually going to come before Fight Night. I'm really interested in Mackenzie Dern versus the Scales. I want to see if she makes weight. That's going to be all eyes for me right there.
Yeah, because she's at strawweight now against
Right.
Cyphers.
Yep.
That should be interesting. Jay, Ben, what fights stand out to you that you want to highlight very briefly here?
I mean, give me Spike Carlisle versus Billy Quarantillo. I mean, on the one hand, Quarantillo is a guy who came up from the regionals, looked great on the Contender Series, looked great in his actual UFC debut. You know, a bit of a late bloomer at 31 in a lighter weight class, but I mean, nonetheless, he could be legit. So at best, we get him taking a step up. At worst, we get another insane Carlisle promo on the mic. This, if I may remind you, is the guy who calls himself Alpha Ginger and said the words 187 on the 666 in his post-fight interview back in February. So we're gonna get some madness.
I wrote that down in the play-by-play in his fight because I just couldn't. It couldn't, and I wanted to, and I couldn't. That guy. Well, it's funny because I was looking at Fight of the Night candidates, especially in the early prelims, as we like to do, and I expected one of you guys was going to take either Elliot Royville or Kenny Smolka, and I would take the other one you hadn't taken. So I'm kind of stuck here because I was planning on digging into the one that wasn't already discussed. I think of those two, I believe they're, let's see, Elliot Royville is at flyweight and Kenny Smolka is at bantamweight. That's what I last recalled. I think Kenny Smolka is going to be. Do you remember when Louis Smolka fought Tim Elliott a couple of years ago, and it was 3 rounds of all the scrambles and all the jiu-jitsu and sweeps and reverses and everything in between, kitchen sink stuff? I think that could be this kind of fight here, and I'm looking forward to it because I think that's going to be a lot of fun. But on the other hand, Tim Elliott's a wild man, so one of those two very well could be it. I'm not going to commit to one or the other. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
I'm just a guy in a Hawaiian shirt.
Definitely should be some exciting matchups there all around. So, fellas, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this edition of Unleashed. Thank you once again to Tyler for joining the panel. You can find him on Twitter at the through the magic of post-production by that name below him right now. You can find his work on WrestleZone and Sherdog.com. Jay and Ben, you can also find their work on Sherdog.com, and me, Ant Walker. You can find my work on The Body Lock, MMA On Point, Sherdog, My MMA News, and of course the Walk On Network. So you know what you got to do. You got to like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. And you must stay beautiful. You must stay positive. And through it all, you got to stay sexy. I'll see you when I see you. Peace.